I still remember the answer. Reebok. It's funny what the brain decides to hold on to. Out of everything that happened that day, out of all the panic, all the fear, all the nights afterward when I lay awake replaying it in my head, that's the detail that somehow survived untouched. Not the screams, not the pounding on the door, not the terror. The answer to a stupid logo quiz. I was a junior at Pine Ridge High School at the time. It was the final class period on a Friday afternoon, and spring break was less than an hour away. Nobody in that building was focused on academics anymore. Teachers knew it. Students knew it. Even the administrators probably knew it. The atmosphere felt different than a normal school day. There was an excitement in the air that only exists right before a long break. Conversations were louder. People were smiling more. Every glance at the classroom clock felt meaningful. Backpacks sat beside desks, already packed and ready to go. Some students had jackets on despite still being in class. Others were texting under their desks, making plans for the weekend. I remember hearing fragments of conversations all around me. Someone was talking about a lake trip. A couple of guys behind me were arguing about which party they were going to that night. A girl near the window was trying to convince her parents through text to let her stay at a friend's house. Nobody cared about statistics, not even our teacher. Mr. Harlan was one of those rare teachers who understood when a battle wasn't worth fighting. He wasn't lazy. He just knew there was absolutely no chance of getting 30 teenagers to care about probability distributions on the final hour before spring break. So instead of teaching, he pulled up a trivia website on the projector. Nobody complained. In fact, everybody seemed relieved. For the next 20 minutes, the classroom became surprisingly lively. Brand logos, movie quotes, random geography questions, state capitals. The room filled with shouting and laughter. People who barely spoke during class suddenly became competitive. Every correct answer earned cheers. Every wrong answer earned groans. For a little while, it felt like one of those rare school memories that would eventually become nostalgic. Simple, harmless, fun. Then everything changed. 1 second, my friend Carter was practically standing out of his seat yelling an answer toward the screen. Reebok. Several people immediately agreed. A few others argued that it was Nike. The entire room erupted into debate. Then the loudspeaker crackled overhead. The sound cut through the classroom instantly. At first, nobody thought much of it. Announcements happened all the time. But the second the voice came through the speaker, the room went silent. It was Principal Wallace, and something was wrong. Very wrong. His voice didn't sound irritated. It didn't sound authoritative. It sounded scared. Genuinely scared. The kind of fear adults try to hide but can't quite manage. Teachers, initiate lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. For a moment, nobody moved. The words seemed to hang in the air. Then reality hit. Every conversation died at once. The room became completely silent. I felt a cold sensation spread through my chest before I even fully processed what had been said. I looked at Mr. Harlan. His face told me everything. I had never seen him look frightened before, not once. But now all the colors seemed drained from his face. Without wasting a second, he rushed toward the classroom door. The lock clicked. He shut off the lights. The room immediately darkened. Then he motioned urgently toward the back corner of the classroom. Move now. Nobody laughed. Nobody asked questions. Nobody complained. Within seconds 30, students were squeezing into the designated lockdown area behind filing cabinets, storage shelves, and stacks of boxes. People pushed together shoulder to shoulder. Some students crouched. Others sat on the floor. A few simply stood because there wasn't enough room. The darkness made everything feel smaller, more confined. The room that had felt relaxed and cheerful 5 minutes earlier suddenly felt like a bunker. At first, all I could hear was breathing. Then the whispers started. What happened? Did somebody bring a gun? Maybe it's a drill. No, he said it wasn't. Do you think someone's outside? Nobody knew anything, and that uncertainty made everything worse. A few minutes later, something happened that scared me even more. The faint electrical hum that constantly came from the ventilation system suddenly stopped. At first, I didn't realize what had changed. Then it hit me. The building had gone quiet, too quiet. The lights were already off. Now the air system had stopped too. The school had lost power. A strange heaviness settled over the room. Until that moment, a part of me still believed there would be some harmless explanation. Maybe a misunderstanding, maybe a false alarm. But losing power made everything feel real, dangerously real. Time moved differently after that. Minutes stretched endlessly. Every second seemed heavier than the one before it. Nobody checked phones anymore. Nobody joked. Nobody talked above a whisper. Every small sound felt enormous. The rustling of a jacket, someone shifting their weight, a nervous sniffle, the scrape of a shoe against the floor. Then we heard the scream. It echoed through the hallway outside, loud, raw, violent. It wasn't the scream of a student. You could tell immediately. It was an adult man. The kind of scream that comes from someone completely out of control. The entire class froze. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. Another scream followed, closer this time. A girl beside me immediately started crying, not loudly, just quiet panic sobs she couldn't stop. Nobody told her to be quiet. Everyone was too scared to think about anything except the sounds outside. The screaming continued, closer, louder. Then came the banging. Boom, boom. The metallic crash echoed through the hallway. Lockers rattled violently. The sound traveled through the walls and floor. Each impact felt like a gunshot. The man was hitting the lockers as he moved, smashing into them, kicking them, slamming them with something. I don't know. I only know the noise was terrifying. Then we heard him shout, "I'll kill every single one of you!" His voice cracked with rage. There was nothing rational in it, nothing human. It sounded like someone who had completely lost control. That was the exact moment I stopped believing everything would be okay. Up until then, I had been scared. Now I was terrified. For the first time in my life, I genuinely believed there was a possibility I might not make it home. Mr. Harlan held a finger to his lips. The gesture was unnecessary. Nobody was making a sound. People weren't just being quiet, they were frozen. The footsteps outside drew nearer. Then suddenly the banging stopped. The hallway fell silent. A silence somehow worse than the noise. I remember staring toward the outline of the classroom door. Waiting, listening, praying, then it happened. Bang! The door shook violently. Several students screamed. Another impact followed, then another. Each strike rattled the entire frame. Dust drifted from somewhere near the ceiling. The man was trying to get inside. "Open up!" The voice exploded through the hallway. Someone nearby started crying harder. Another student buried his face in his hands. One boy quietly whispered a prayer over and over. I remember hearing him repeat the same sentence several times. His voice was shaking. The pounding continued, again, again, again. Every hit felt stronger than the last. I kept imagining the lock failing, the hinges breaking, the door flying inward. The worst part was not seeing him. That sounds strange, but it's true. If he had been standing in front of us, at least we would have known what we were dealing with. Instead, all we had was our imagination. And imagination is cruel. Every person in that room was probably picturing something different, but I guarantee every version was horrifying. Finally, after what felt like forever, the pounding stopped. The hallway became quiet again. Then we heard footsteps, moving away slowly. The screaming returned briefly, then faded, farther and farther down the hall, until eventually there was nothing. Just silence. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even after the sounds disappeared, we remained frozen in place. Part of us expected him to come back. Part of us expected the door to explode open at any moment. So we waited and listened and hoped. Nearly 20 minutes passed before the loudspeaker finally came back on. When Principal Wallace spoke again, his voice sounded more controlled, but the tension was still obvious. He explained that an unidentified man had entered the school through the main entrance. The man had assaulted the receptionist. Afterward, he had wandered through parts of the building. Staff members were uncertain whether he was armed. Police had been called. The school would remain under restricted lockdown while authorities searched the area. His explanation answered some questions, but it created many more. Eventually, the school day ended. Students were dismissed. Parents arrived. Buses left. Life appeared to return to normal. Most of us convinced ourselves the nightmare was over, but it wasn't. That evening, rumors began spreading throughout town. Some came through social media. Others came through parents. Others spread the old-fashioned way, from person to person. One story kept appearing again and again. A janitor working later that night had discovered the same man sleeping inside a maintenance closet near the back of the school. At first, most people assumed it was another rumor. Then more details emerged. According to multiple accounts, the janitor accidentally woke him. And when the man sat up, a large revolver was visible inside his jacket. The janitor reportedly backed away and called police. By the time officers arrived, the man was gone. Vanished. No arrest was announced. No explanation was given. No updates ever reached the students. The story simply faded away. Years have passed since then, almost a decade. Most of us have graduated, moved away, started careers, started families, built completely different lives. but every once in a while the subject comes up. Someone from my graduating class will mention that day, the lockdown, the screams, the man, and the conversation always ends the same way. Nobody knows what happened to him. Maybe he was arrested later. Maybe police found him somewhere else. Maybe he received the help he desperately needed. Or maybe none of those things happened. Maybe he's still out there, older now, gray-haired, walking around somewhere completely unnoticed, living among strangers who have no idea who he once was. What bothers me most isn't what happened. It's what almost happened. Sometimes I think back to those impacts against the classroom door, the violence behind them, the desperation, the rage, and I wonder how much longer that lock would have held. A minute? 30 seconds? One more good hit? I'll never know. And honestly, I don't want to know, because every time I revisit that memory, I come to the same conclusion. We weren't brave, we weren't prepared, we weren't special, we were lucky. Unbelievably lucky. The lockdown happened on a Tuesday in early October. I remember that detail because it was the first truly cold day of the school year. Not freezing cold, just enough to make everyone suddenly realize summer was gone. The sky had been gray since morning, not the dramatic kind of gray that comes before a storm. It was the dull, colorless kind that seems to stretch forever, turning everything beneath it flat and lifeless. The trees around the school had only just started changing colors. A few orange and yellow leaves clung stubbornly to branches while others scattered across sidewalks and parking lots. The entire town felt tired that day. Looking back, maybe that's one reason the memory feels so vivid. Everything seemed normal, completely normal, until it wasn't. At the time, I was in 7th grade at Westbrook Middle School. Lunch had just started. Like most schools in our district, there were too many students to fit into the cafeteria at once, so lunch periods were split into groups. I was assigned to the first lunch. For a middle school student, lunch was one of the most important parts of the day. It was the one period where nobody worried about quizzes or homework. Everyone just wanted to eat, talk, and forget about classes for a little while. The cafeteria was exactly as loud and chaotic as you'd expect. Students were carrying trays between tables. Friends were yelling across the room. Someone had dropped a carton of chocolate milk, causing a group of kids nearby to burst into laughter. Nothing felt unusual, nothing felt dangerous. I was sitting near one of the cafeteria windows with 3 friends. We were arguing about something completely stupid. I honestly can't remember what. A video game, a movie, some meaningless middle school debate that seemed incredibly important at the time. Then we heard the first boom. The sound came from somewhere outside, a deep crack, sharp enough to cut through the noise of the cafeteria. I barely reacted. Neither did most people around me. The weather forecast had been predicting rain all day, and my first thought was thunder. A few students glanced toward the windows, then everyone went back to eating. A few seconds later, another boom echoed across campus, then another, then another. This time something changed. The room's atmosphere shifted. You could actually feel it. The noise level dropped. People stopped talking. Heads turned. Confused expressions appeared everywhere. Then, almost instantly, panic exploded. Students started screaming, not playful screaming, not excited screaming, real screaming. The kind that comes from fear spreading through a crowd faster than facts ever can. To this day, I still don't know who panicked first. Maybe somebody thought they heard gunshots. Maybe somebody saw adults running. Maybe one frightened reaction triggered another. Whatever happened, it spread through the cafeteria like wildfire. Within seconds, hundreds of students were on their feet. Some were crying. Others were trying to figure out what was happening. A few simply followed the crowd because everyone else was moving. At first, I was confused more than scared. Then I looked at the adults. And that's when my stomach dropped. Because adults don't panic unless something is seriously wrong. The campus security officers weren't walking. They were running, actually running. One officer burst through the cafeteria entrance at full speed. His face looked tense, focused, urgent. He didn't look like someone dealing with a routine problem. "Everybody inside the gym," he shouted. "Move now!" The cafeteria erupted into complete chaos. Students abandoned lunches where they sat. Trays crashed onto tables. Food spilled onto the floor. People shoved past one another trying to reach the exits. The sound was overwhelming. Voices, footsteps, crying, teachers yelling directions. For a few moments, it felt like nobody was in control. I remember clutching my backpack strap as I followed the crowd, pure instinct, as if carrying my backpack somehow mattered, as if homework and notebooks were still important. The gymnasium sat inside the large multi-purpose building on the opposite side of campus. Students poured toward it from every direction. By then, a light rain had started falling, a cold drizzle, the kind you barely notice at first. Then 20 minutes later, you realize your clothes are damp and your hair is soaked. The rain made everything feel even more unsettling. Gray sky, cold air, students running, teachers shouting. It felt like being inside a scene from a movie. Except nobody knew the script. When we reached the gym, staff members were already waiting. Students flooded inside. Teachers directed us toward the bleachers and floor seating areas. I remember noticing something strange almost immediately. The staff looked frightened, not concerned, not cautious, frightened. Several teachers were pulling heavy curtains across the massive glass walls overlooking the parking lot. Others stood near doors. A few administrators huddled together, speaking urgently into radios. Nobody smiled. Nobody reassured us. Nobody said everything would be okay. That silence was terrifying. Children can tell when adults are pretending, and on that day, nobody even tried. We all sat there wondering what was happening, wondering what we weren't being told. When information disappears, rumors rush in to fill the empty space. Within minutes, stories started spreading. An escaped prisoner, a terrorist attack, a gang shooting, an armed robber, a murderer. Every version sounded worse than the one before it. Most were obviously ridiculous. But when you're 12 years old and scared, logic doesn't always win. Fear does. My friend Mason was sitting nearby. Mason was the kind of kid who always needed answers. The kind who couldn't leave a mystery alone. While everyone else whispered among themselves, he actually stood up and walked toward one of the assistant principals. I remember watching him go. Partly because I was curious, partly because I couldn't believe he was brave enough to do it. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When Mason returned, his face looked completely different, pale, serious. The joking attitude he usually carried was gone. "What happened?" I asked. He sat down beside us. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he leaned closer. "You know those houses across from the school?" We all nodded. Everyone knew the neighborhood. There was a small cluster of older houses directly across from the athletic fields. Most students barely paid attention to them. They were simply part of the scenery, background details. The kind of thing you pass every day without really seeing. Apparently one of the guys who lives there snapped. Nobody spoke. Mason lowered his voice even more. "He got an eviction notice this morning, so?" someone asked. He barricaded himself inside the house. The words immediately made my chest tighten. Even at 12 years old, I knew what that meant. Police, guns, danger. He told officers he'd shoot anyone who came inside. Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. The entire group listened. Then Mason added something that made everything worse, much worse. "They think he was walking around near the school earlier." "What do you mean?" "Watching students." The words settled over us like a cold blanket. For several seconds, nobody said anything. The gym suddenly felt smaller. The walls felt closer. I found myself glancing toward the covered windows, toward the neighborhood beyond them, toward the houses we passed every day without thinking. Somewhere out there was a man threatening to shoot people. A man who might have spent the morning watching kids, watching us. I couldn't stop imagining him standing behind a fence, or sitting inside a parked car, or looking through a window. The possibilities felt endless, and every one of them was disturbing. The longer we remained inside the gym, the stranger everything felt. Teachers weren't focused on students anymore. They were watching entrances, watching windows, watching each other, waiting. It genuinely felt as though everyone expected something terrible to happen. Nearly an hour passed. An entire class period disappeared. Students became restless. The younger kids started crying. Others asked repeatedly if they could call their parents. The answer was always no. No phones, no leaving, no information. Just waiting. The uncertainty became exhausting. Outside, rain tapped softly against the building. Inside, hundreds of students sat trapped with their thoughts. I remember staring toward the covered windows over and over. My imagination kept returning to the same image. A house, a dark window, a man standing behind it, watching. Eventually, administrators announced that the lockdown was ending. The relief inside the gym was immediate. Students sighed. Teachers relaxed slightly. Conversations started again, but the fear never fully disappeared. Police escorted students back to classrooms in small groups. Nobody was allowed near certain sections of campus. Nobody was permitted outside. The rest of the school day felt surreal. Teachers attempted lessons. Students pretended to listen, but everyone's mind was somewhere else. The man across the street, the police, the threats, the lockdown, that was all anyone talked about. When the final bell rang, students practically sprinted toward buses and parent pickup areas. Everybody wanted to go home. Everybody wanted answers. That evening, I called my friend Hannah. She lived only a few houses away from the man. I expected her to know more. What I didn't expect was how shaken she sounded. Her voice carried a nervousness I hadn't heard earlier that day. Police vehicles had filled her street for hours. Officers blocked roads. Neighbors remained inside. Nobody knew how the situation would end. According to Hannah, the standoff lasted nearly 6 hours before police finally took the man into custody. That alone was unsettling. But it wasn't the detail that stayed with me. The detail that stayed with me happened nearly a year earlier, the previous Halloween. At first, the story sounded too strange to believe. Hannah told me she had been trick-or-treating with several friends. Around 8 o'clock, they reached the man's house. The property looked abandoned. No decorations, no pumpkins, no lights, nothing, just darkness. Most houses on the street were glowing with porch lights and Halloween decorations. His house looked dead. As the kids walked past, one of them noticed a figure standing in an upstairs window. At first, they assumed it was a decoration. After all, Halloween was full of fake bodies, mannequins, and creepy displays. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there, motionless, watching. Then someone realized it was a real person, the man. According to Hannah, he was staring directly at the children outside. Not smiling, not waving, not reacting, just staring. His expression never changed. The longer they looked, the more uncomfortable they became. Something about him felt wrong, deeply wrong. Then he slowly raised one hand. The kids thought he was going to wave. Instead, he touched the glass. At first, nobody understood what he was doing. His arm moved slowly, dragging something across the window. A dark streak appeared, then another, then another. The children watched in confusion. Only when a neighboring porch light illuminated the glass did they realize what they were seeing. The streaks were red, bright red. The man was smearing blood across the window, word by word, letter by letter. Crooked lines formed across the glass, uneven, shaky, almost trembling. "Stay away." For a second, nobody moved. The words didn't even feel real. Then instinct took over. The children turned and ran, sprinting down the street as fast as they could. Nobody stopped until they were several houses away. When they told adults what had happened, nobody believed them. Most people assumed it had been fake blood, a Halloween prank, an attempt to scare trick-or-treaters, a bizarre joke, an attention-seeking stunt. People laughed it off, dismissed it, forgot about it, until the lockdown, until the police, until the threats. Suddenly, the story didn't seem funny anymore. It seemed like a warning everyone had ignored. In the days that followed, more information emerged. Police confirmed the man had a long history of severe mental illness. There had been reports over the years. Violent incidents, self-harm, confrontations with neighbors, disturbing behavior that many people had simply learned to live around. Some residents were shocked. Others weren't surprised at all. In fact, a few admitted they had been expecting something bad to happen eventually. Because the warning signs had been there for years, people just chose not to see them, or convinced themselves someone else would deal with them. What still bothers me all these years later isn't the lockdown itself. It's the distance, or rather the lack of distance. That house sat less than 200 yards from our school, less than 200 yards from the cafeteria, from the playground, from the basketball courts, from the buses, from hundreds of children. For years, we walked past that neighborhood without a second thought. It was just another street, another row of houses, another part of town. Nothing special, nothing threatening. As kids, we tend to imagine danger as something obvious, something dramatic, something that announces itself. We assume we'll recognize it immediately. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes danger doesn't arrive from far away. Sometimes it doesn't look like a monster. Sometimes it lives quietly behind a curtain, behind a fence, behind a second-story window, watching people pass by every day, waiting, and nobody truly notices until the day everything finally goes wrong. I was 23 years old when this happened. At the time, I had recently graduated from college with a degree in information systems. Like a lot of people fresh out of school, I was stuck in that awkward stage of life where you technically had a degree, but nobody seemed interested in hiring you for the jobs the degree was supposed to get you. I spent months sending out applications. Every morning started the same way. Wake up, check email, see nothing, submit more applications, wait, repeat. Most responses were automated rejections. Many companies never responded at all. The excitement I had felt at graduation slowly gave way to frustration, then uncertainty, and eventually something close to self-doubt. I knew I wasn't the only one going through it. A lot of my friends were dealing with the same thing. Still, that didn't make it any easier. The opportunity that finally came along arrived from a place I never expected: my old high school. A couple of former computer science teachers remembered me and recommended me for a temporary position, helping maintain the school's network infrastructure. The job wasn't glamorous. I wasn't designing software. I wasn't building anything revolutionary. Most days involved troubleshooting printers, replacing network switches, crawling beneath desks to run cables, or helping teachers who had somehow forgotten their passwords for the third time that month. But it paid the bills. At that point, that was enough. There was also something strangely comforting about returning to a place that had once been such a huge part of my life. Walking those hallways again felt surreal. Some classrooms looked exactly the same. Certain teachers were still there. The smell of the building hadn't changed. Even the squeak of the gym floor sounded familiar. At first, it felt nostalgic, like revisiting an old chapter of my life. I had no idea that feeling would eventually disappear completely. The school itself was nearly 50 years old. Over decades of renovations, expansions, and budget-friendly additions, it had become a maze. New hallways connected to old hallways. Storage rooms had been converted into offices. Unused spaces had been repurposed countless times. Some areas felt modern. Others looked frozen in another decade. The technology department operated from a basement section that most students didn't even know existed. If you asked students where the servers were located, most wouldn't have had a clue. That basement became my workplace. And honestly, it wasn't bad. The main storage area was cluttered with years of forgotten equipment, broken projectors, old textbooks, retired desktop computers, stacks of desks, filing cabinets nobody had opened in years. Dust covered almost everything. It looked like the school had simply thrown unwanted items down there for decades and forgotten about them. Hidden beyond that clutter, however, was our office. And compared to the rest of the basement, it felt surprisingly comfortable. There were 3 of us who worked there: Leonard, the network administrator; Carl, another technician; and me. The office had better air conditioning than most classrooms upstairs, a large television mounted on one wall, comfortable rolling chairs, a refrigerator stocked with soda and bottled water. Someone had even brought in a small coffee machine. Compared to the classrooms packed with students, it felt like a secret hideout, a place nobody else knew existed. For the first few months, I genuinely enjoyed the job. The work was predictable, the environment was relaxed. Nothing exciting ever happened, at least that's what I believed. Then Thursday arrived, and everything changed. It was early May, one of those unusually warm spring days that makes everyone start thinking about summer. Students were counting down the remaining weeks of school. Teachers seemed more relaxed. Even the hallways felt lighter somehow. Around noon, Leonard and Carl headed upstairs to meet with administrators regarding a server upgrade project. I stayed behind. I had lunch, several maintenance tasks to finish, and a quiet afternoon ahead of me. Nothing about the day seemed remarkable. I remember unwrapping a sandwich while checking system logs on my monitor. The television played quietly in the background. The office air conditioner hummed steadily. It felt like every other workday. Then the office phone rang. The sound startled me immediately. Not because phones ringing was unusual, but because almost nobody ever called that line directly. Most communication happened through email or internal messaging. The sharp ring echoed through the room. I glanced at the caller ID main office. Without thinking, I answered, "Technology Department." The voice that responded belonged to the school secretary, and something in her tone instantly made me sit upright. She sounded tense, not stressed, not busy, scared. The kind of scared people try very hard to hide. "Even," she said. Her voice was shaky. "Listen carefully." Every muscle in my body tightened. "Okay, we're initiating a full lockdown." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. A lockdown? A real one? Not a drill? What happened? There was a brief pause. Then she spoke again. "We believe there's an armed individual somewhere in the building." The words hit me like a punch. An armed individual, inside the building, not outside, not nearby, inside. Suddenly the basement felt very different, very vulnerable. "Stay where you are," she continued. "Turn off all lights and remain hidden until we contact you again." Then the call ended. Just like that, no additional information, no explanation, no reassurance. The line simply went dead. I stared at the phone. The office seemed unusually quiet. A few moments earlier it had felt comfortable. Now it felt exposed. The reality of my situation sank in almost immediately. Our office didn't have a door. Years earlier someone had removed it. Nobody ever bothered replacing it. The entrance was completely open. Anyone walking through the basement could see directly inside. That realization alone was bad enough. Then I remembered something worse. The lock on the basement access door upstairs had been broken for months. Maintenance had never gotten around to fixing it. Anyone could walk down those stairs. Anyone. Students, parents, strangers, anybody. I stood up quickly, switched off the lights. The office disappeared into darkness. Only tiny green and blue indicator lights remained visible. Server equipment blinked softly around the room. The LEDs looked like distant stars floating in blackness. I silenced my phone. Then I sat down and waited. At first I expected to hear something. An alarm, an announcement, running footsteps, anything. Instead, there was silence. An unnatural silence. Schools are noisy places. Even during class periods, there are always sounds. Doors opening, lockers closing, students talking, footsteps in hallways. But now there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Just the faint hum of servers, cooling fans, and my own breathing. I sent a text to Leonard. No response. I texted Carl. Nothing. That worried me more than I wanted to admit. The longer they remained silent, the more possibilities entered my head. Maybe they were hiding. Maybe they hadn't seen the messages. Or maybe something had happened. I hated that thought. But fear doesn't care what thoughts you want. Fear supplies its own. Minutes crawled by. 5, 10, 20, maybe more. Time felt distorted. Every minute stretched endlessly. My imagination filled the silence. I pictured police officers moving through classrooms, teachers locking doors, students hiding beneath desks. Every terrible possibility seemed plausible because I had no information, no way of knowing what was happening upstairs. Then I heard it. The basement door. A metallic creak echoed through the darkness. My entire body froze. Someone had entered the stairwell. At first I immediately assumed it was Leonard or Carl. That made sense. They worked down here. Maybe they were returning. Maybe everything was fine. Then I heard the footsteps, and something felt wrong. Very wrong. They weren't hurried. They weren't cautious. The person wasn't sneaking, wasn't running, wasn't searching. The footsteps sounded calm, deliberate, confident, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. One step, another, another. The sound echoed down the concrete stairwell, growing closer. I slowly slid from my chair. Every instinct screamed at me to get lower, get smaller, disappear. I crawled beneath the desk. The concrete floor felt cold against my knees. My pulse pounded so hard I could hear it. The footsteps reached the basement, then entered the storage area. Closer, closer, closer. Then silence. Complete silence. Whoever it was had stopped moving. I held my breath, listening, waiting. The seconds felt endless. Then the footsteps resumed, this time heading directly toward the office, toward me. Toward the darkness where I was hiding. I heard the person enter. No lights came on, no voice called out, no explanation. Just silence. A living, breathing silence. The kind that feels heavy. The kind that makes your imagination run wild. My mouth had gone completely dry. I stared through the narrow gap beneath the desk, trying desperately to see anything. Instead, there was only darkness. Then my phone vibrated. A text message. The sound was tiny, barely audible. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have noticed it. In that moment, it sounded as loud as a siren. My heart stopped. The silence in the room changed instantly. Whoever stood nearby heard it too. I knew they had. The footsteps started moving again, slowly, carefully, toward my desk. Each step felt deliberate, measured, like a predator approaching something cornered. I remember thinking one clear thought. This is it. This is how people die. Not in dramatic movie scenes, not in heroic moments. Just hiding beneath desk in the dark, alone, terrified, waiting. The footsteps stopped directly beside me. I could see a pair of boots only a few feet away. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The silence became unbearable. My body finally reached its limit. Fear overwhelmed reason. Before I could stop myself, I lunged out from beneath the desk. Please don't shoot. The words exploded out of me, louder than I intended. Desperate, panicked. I expected violence. I expected a weapon. I expected the worst. Instead, a hand grabbed my arm. I looked up. A man stood in front of me, mid-40s maybe. Red flannel shirt, blue jeans, dark baseball cap. His expression looked startled, almost confused. "It's okay," he said quickly. His voice sounded calm, remarkably calm. Too calm. "I'm hiding too." For a second I just stared at him, trying to process what was happening, trying to understand why another person was down here. "Who are you?" I asked. The man glanced toward the doorway, then back at me. I came to pick up my son. He spoke quietly. One of the teachers told me to find somewhere safe. The explanation sounded reasonable. Completely reasonable. And that was the problem, because I wanted to believe it, desperately. Fear makes people cling to comforting explanations. Even when something doesn't feel right, even when instinct is screaming. We stood there together in the darkness, listening, waiting. Several seconds passed, then my phone vibrated again. This time silently, I glanced down, a message from Leonard, and the moment I read it, my entire world changed. The message was short, only 3 lines, but I can honestly say those 3 lines changed my life. Even now, years later, I remember exactly how they looked on the screen, exactly how my stomach dropped, exactly how the room seemed to tilt around me. The first message read, "Dude." A second followed immediately after. "Stay hidden," then came the third. The one I still see sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night. Mr. Donovan got shot. For a moment, my brain refused to process the words. I simply stared at them, reading them over and over. Mr. Donovan, shot. The words didn't belong together. Mr. Donovan wasn't just a teacher. He had been one of my teachers when I attended the school, one of the good ones. The kind students remembered years after graduation. The idea that someone had actually shot him felt impossible. Unreal. My pulse immediately accelerated. I started typing a response. Then another message appeared, and everything changed. "Shooter is wearing a red shirt and dark hat." I felt something cold move through my entire body. A sensation unlike anything I had experienced before or since. Not fear, not exactly. It was closer to pure survival instinct. A sudden realization that arrives before your mind can fully catch up. The kind that tells you something is terribly wrong. My eyes moved back to the message. Red shirt, dark hat. Then they slowly lifted toward the man standing only a few feet away. The red flannel shirt, the dark baseball cap, the calm expression. Everything inside me seemed to stop. The office disappeared, the servers disappeared, the darkness disappeared. There was only him and the realization. I remember hearing my own heartbeat. Loud, fast, violent. The man was still watching. At first his expression didn't change. Then I saw it happen. A tiny shift, barely noticeable. But enough, his eyes moved from my face to the phone in my hand, then back to me. For one brief second, we simply stared at each other. Neither of us spoke, neither of us moved, yet somehow everything had changed. I knew who he was, and he knew that I knew. The mask disappeared, not completely, not dramatically, but enough. The friendly parent act vanished. The harmless explanation vanished. For the first time, I noticed something hidden beneath his calm expression. Something cold, something calculating, something dangerous. A strange thing happens when your brain realizes you're in immediate danger. Movies make it seem dramatic. Slow motion, heroic decisions, brilliant plans. Reality isn't like that. At least it wasn't for me. There was no plan, no strategy, no courage, only instinct. Raw instinct. Run, that was it, run. I turned and bolted. The movement happened before I consciously decided to do it. One moment I was standing there. The next I was sprinting across the office. Behind me I heard the man shout. I couldn't make out the words, I didn't care. Every survival instinct I possessed had taken over. The basement erupted into chaos. My shoes slammed against the concrete floor. I sprinted through the darkness, past shelves, past boxes, past stacks of forgotten equipment. Then came the gunshot. The sound exploded through the basement. It wasn't anything like gunshots in movies. Movies never get it right. The sound wasn't sharp. It was violent. A deafening blast that seemed to punch through the air itself. The noise hit me like a physical force. For a split second, I thought I had been shot. My entire body locked up. Then a shower of sparks erupted from a metal storage shelf only a few feet away. The bullet slammed into steel. The impact echoed through the basement. Pieces of metal ricocheted across the floor. Only then did I realize the shot had missed. By inches. Maybe less. That thought terrified me even more, because it meant he wasn't threatening me, he wasn't warning me. He was trying to kill me. I ran harder. Every breath burned. My lungs felt ready to burst. The darkness blurred around me. I barely remember crossing the storage room. I barely remember reaching the stairs. Everything became fragments. A hand grabbing a railing. Concrete steps rushing beneath my feet. My heart pounding so hard it felt painful. Behind me I heard movement. Fast movement. The shooter was coming after me. I never looked back. Not once. People always ask whether I looked behind. Whether I checked how close he was. I didn't. Because some part of me knew that if I looked back, I might slow down. And if I slowed down, I might die. So I focused on one thing. The door at the top of the stairs. Just reach the door. Just reach the door. Just reach the door. I burst through it. The bright hallway light was almost blinding after so long in darkness. For a fraction of a second, I couldn't see anything. Then shapes appeared. Movement, people, uniforms, police officers. The hallway was full of them. Weapons drawn, body armor, radios crackling. The sights nearly made my legs give out. Several officers immediately turned toward me. Someone grabbed my arm. Another officer pulled me behind him. I remember voices shouting, questions, commands. Everything happened too quickly to understand. Then the basement door flew open behind me. The man emerged from the stairwell. For one brief moment, our eyes met again. I still remember that. His face looked completely different now. The calm father, the worried parent, the harmless stranger. All of it was gone. What remained was anger. Pure anger. He barely managed 2 steps into the hallway. The officers were already moving. They hit him from multiple directions. The impact drove him to the floor. His weapon skidded across the tile. People shouted. More officers rushed forward. Within seconds, he disappeared beneath a pile of uniforms. Then it was over, just like that. The chase, the fear, the gunshot, the uncertainty. All of it ended in a matter of seconds. The man was handcuffed, and I was alive. I remember sitting against a hallway wall afterward. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. No matter how hard I tried. An officer handed me a bottle of water. I couldn't even open it properly. The cap kept slipping through my fingers. The adrenaline was still flooding through my system. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me still couldn't believe any of it had happened. The strangest thing was how normal everything looked. The hallway appeared exactly as it had every other day. The same lockers, the same bulletin boards, the same classroom doors. Yet my entire perception of the building had changed forever. Hours later, investigators began piecing together the story. Over the following days, more information became public. The shooter had entered the school searching for a history teacher, Mr. Donovan. Apparently, the 2 men had known each other years earlier. Exactly what happened between them was never fully disclosed. Rumors circulated. Some involved personal disputes. Others involved old grudges. Some people claimed there had been legal issues between them. Others insisted it was something entirely different. To my knowledge, nobody outside the investigation ever learned the full truth. Whatever history existed between them remained buried. What investigators did confirm was far simpler. The man had found Mr. Donovan, and he had shot him. Thankfully, Mr. Donovan survived. The bullet missed several critical areas by an astonishingly small margin. Doctors later described him as incredibly fortunate. Lucky. It's a word that came up repeatedly afterward. Lucky. Mr. Donovan was lucky. The officers arrived quickly. Lucky. The bullet in the basement missed me. Lucky. The text message reached me when it did. Lucky. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling that word became. Because luck isn't a plan. Luck isn't protection. Luck is randomness, and randomness can easily move in the opposite direction. For weeks afterward, sleep became difficult. I would wake suddenly in the middle of the night. Certain sounds triggered instant anxiety. A door slamming, unexpected footsteps, a loud voice in public. Even text notifications affected me. That surprised me more than anything. Before that day, a text alert was just another sound. Afterward, it became something different, because one tiny vibration had marked the exact moment my life split into 2 parts. Before I knew, and after I knew. Friends and family tried to help. Coworkers checked in on me constantly. People meant well. They really did. But some experiences are difficult to explain unless you've lived through them. How do you describe standing beside someone for several minutes while unknowingly hiding from them? How do you explain that feeling? That realization? That sudden shift when a harmless stranger transforms into a mortal threat? Even now, I struggle to put it into words. Years have passed since that day. The fear isn't as sharp as it once was. Time softens most things. But not everything. Some memories refuse to fade. Some remain preserved with terrifying clarity. The darkness of that office, the blinking server lights, the slow footsteps approaching, the red flannel shirt, the baseball cap, the text message, and the horrifying realization that while I thought I was hiding from a gunman, I had actually been hiding beside him the entire time. A lot of fears eventually fade into stories. Stories you tell, stories you laugh about, stories that lose their power. This one never did, and I don't think it ever will.